Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a question that, let's be honest, has probably crossed all of our minds at some point. Why is life so often, well, unsatisfying? We're going to explore the pretty radical diagnosis offered about 2,500 years ago by the Buddha, his first huge insight into what it means to be human. You know the feeling, right? It's that constant low-level hum of dissatisfaction that can range from a tiny frustration to really deep sorrow. Now, tons of philosophies have tried to answer this, but one of the most profound and, honestly, game-changing answers comes from the Buddha. So, the Buddha's whole approach wasn't about just, slapping a Band-Aid on things. He taught that if we want to find a true, lasting cure for all this dissatisfaction, we first need a really clear, unflinching diagnosis. I mean, you wouldn't want a doctor prescribing medicine without first figuring out what's actually wrong, right?
Okay, so let's get into it. The Buddha basically approached this whole thing like a spiritual physician. He was looking at a condition that he realized affects every single one of us. It's universal.
And just think about the sheer range of this symptom. It's everything from the minor sting of getting a gift you didn't really want, all the way to the deep anguish of losing someone you love. The Buddha's big insight was that these aren't just a series of random, unlucky events. Nope, he saw them as a core, predictable feature of life itself. And that simple observation led to his first major teaching, the one that really is the foundation for everything else he ever taught. It's called the First Noble Truth, and it's his diagnosis for the human condition. And the diagnosis is this: life, the way we normally live it, is fundamentally marked by a state called dukkha. Now, this one word, from the ancient Pali language, is the absolute key to understanding everything that comes next.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because it forces a major shift in how we look at things. We tend to think of suffering as, a problem that happens to us every now and then, but the Buddha's diagnosis of dukkha is way more radical. It's not some occasional bug in the system. He's saying it's a fundamental feature of the system itself. It's not something to just run away from, but something to turn towards and really truly understand.
So, what exactly falls under this umbrella of dukkha? The Buddha was incredibly precise here. He broke it down almost like a medical examiner, detailing every single aspect of the condition. He basically pointed to the entire arc of our lives. It includes all the obvious stuff, sickness, getting old, and death, but it also includes all the emotional pain, the sorrow, the frustration of not getting what you want, and even that ache you feel when you lose something you love. But here's where the diagnosis gets truly mind-bending. The Buddha went even deeper than just life events. He pointed directly at the very building blocks of our identity, the parts that create our sense of me, and said that these things in their very nature are dukkha. And this brings us to the most subtle and maybe the most startling part of his whole diagnosis, the deconstruction of what we think of as our self. The Buddha described our entire personal experience, literally everything you think, feel, and are, as being made up of 5 components, or groups. In the Pali language, these are called the Khandhas. Okay, so let's break this down real quick. You've got your physical body. Then you have raw experience or feelings, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. After that comes perception, which is how your mind labels those experiences. Then your mental formations, all your thoughts, reactions, and choices. And finally, you have consciousness, which is just the awareness of all those other parts. Now here's the absolute kicker. We mistake this constantly changing flow for a solid, stable me. And because all these parts are always changing and totally unreliable, clinging to them as I is the deepest source of our suffering. Which, of course, brings us to the million-dollar question. If our body, our feelings, our thoughts are all just a flickering process, is there some permanent, unchanging you sitting in the driver's seat? The Buddha's answer is radical, and it zeroes in on consciousness itself, the very thing many of us might mistake for a soul. To explain this, the Buddha used this brilliant image. Picture 2 bundles of reeds. They can only stand up because they're leaning on each other. You pull one away, and the other one immediately falls over. He said consciousness is just like that. It doesn't exist all on its own. It only ever pops up in dependence on other things. So what does that actually mean? Well, think about it. The consciousness of seeing only happens when there's an eye and something to see. The consciousness of hearing only happens when there's an ear and a sound. You take away one of those conditions, one of the reeds, and that specific consciousness just, poof, it's gone. There's no permanent independent self just hanging out in there. Our sense of a solid I is basically built on shifting sand, and our clinging to it is the most fundamental dukkha of all.
Okay, I know what you might be thinking. Everything is suffering and I'm not even real. It sounds incredibly pessimistic, right? But the Buddha presented this diagnosis not as some kind of death sentence, but as the first absolutely crucial step toward a profound cure.
A good doctor doesn't just hand you a scary diagnosis and say, well, good luck with that. No way. They use the diagnosis to figure out a course for treatment. It's the exact same idea here. By truly understanding the problem, this universal truth of dukkha, we can then start to look at what causes it, realize that it's possible for it to end, and actually walk the path that leads to freedom.
So in the end, the Buddha's first truth isn't about being pessimistic and saying life is miserable. It's actually a pretty courageous invitation to look directly at our own experience without blinking. It suggests that real lasting freedom isn't found by endlessly trying to rearrange the world to get what we want. It's found by changing our relationship with the very nature of wanting itself. And that is a profound place to start.